everybody, and welcome to Chef Comp 2021. My name is Kaya Tolliver. I'm a developer advocate here at Progress, and I'm here today with the incredible Mandy Walls, DevOps advocate at PagerDuty. Mandy's going to be talking about all things automation today, and I don't know about you guys and gals, but I am here for it. Take it away, Mandy.
All right, thanks, Kia. All right, yeah, so like you mentioned, I am now at PagerDuty. This is not my first Chef Comp, so if you recognize me, it's because I did spend a lot of years working at Chef, so this is my first time on this side of the screen in a long time, but we'll make a go for it. So if you'd like to get in touch with me at any time, I am LNXCHK on Twitter and Instagram and all kinds of other places. And if you'd like to email me at PagerDuty, I am mwalls@pagerduty.com. I'm happy to chat with you about anything that you might be interested in about PagerDuty or incident response or the automation stuff I'm going to talk about today, because that's what I'm going to get into. So this is Chef Conf, right? And you're all here because you like a bit of automation, right? Some of it for your infrastructure or whatever you happen to be automating. So let's get into what's it actually mean to automate? Like maybe you're kind of new to this and not sure what to think about and where to go. So at the baseline, what are we actually thinking about when we're thinking about automation? There's a lot of different buzzwords and there's other things in other industries that encompass automation. You might be like, what's this robotic process automation thing? That's like a whole other set of things in a different industry. So when we think about automation for our part of IT and the things that we're doing, right, we're going to take some manual processes that someone on our team was running piece by piece. Maybe they were in a wiki, maybe they were in scripts somewhere, and we're going to ask the machines to do that work for us. We're going to look for tasks that machines are really good at, right? Things that don't require nuance or creativity or lateral thinking, and we're going to encode them in a way that the machine understands. Maybe we're putting those in chef recipes, right? And then the chef interpreter is going to go out and send them to the machines. Then our humans are going to go do something that's more interesting and more valuable, right? So automation becomes a key component in the management of complex real-time IT systems. The amount of information that must be processed and taken into account when you're making decisions or you're making changes is immense and growing, right? We have microservices, we have cloud platforms, we have third-party applications, we have internally developed services, and they all have their own idiosyncrasies and their own behaviors and maybe their own config language, because why would they do that? But there's all this stuff that one person and even one team has a hard time, keeping track of all of it. So to get our work done and to do it right, we rely on automation to get all of our common tasks done, right? So it helps us avoid mistakes. It helps us increase our reliability. It helps us increase our repeatability. And over time, it's going to help us reduce toil. And we're going to talk about toil like it's a 4-letter word, right? And for all of our day-to-day work. We're going to use automation to build and test and deploy all of our software. We're Chef users, so we're automating the creation and maintaining of infrastructure components. And anytime we have to perform a task more than once, or more than one person needs to be able to perform that task, then we really want to think about automating it in a way that is going to preserve that action and make it so that anybody who needs to run this thing today or next Wednesday or whenever is going to get the same outcome that we intended the first time we ran it, right? So there's lots of things that we can think about. Automation takes lots of different forms. You've got your chef recipes. You might have some stuff in YAML files that some other tool ingests. You might have, the configurations that are in your build server that might be in XML or some other horrible thing, right? But they're all places where you're collecting up expertise and encapsulating it into a place where you can then share it with everyone else on the team. So let's think about what toil actually is. And if you've read the Google SRE book, there's a bit on toil that's sort of the origin of this as the term for this kind of work, right? And it's a 4-letter word. You want your teams to do interesting things. People want to do interesting things. They want to do tasks that impact the bottom line, things that create value, and things that require expertise and creativity. In contrast to that, though, you have toil. Toil is the kind of repetitive tactical work that increases linearly as the size of your environment increases. So deploying updates to software and systems, adding users to software or system accounts, scaling environments, testing backups. Even in fully modern systems, like the task of regularly rebuilding all your short-lived environments, all your containers, can end up becoming toil, right? So we know this work has to be done. It doesn't particularly add value to the customer or the end user, but leaving it neglected will definitely impact the user eventually. At some point, sooner or later, people are going to notice that you're not doing the basic maintenance, right? It might allow a security breach. It might cause degraded performance. It's a bit like hygiene. It's like brushing your teeth. Skip a day, it's a pandemic. Did you even see a person today? Well, okay. Quit completely, like your dentist is going to have a serious talk with you, and you might have some issues, right? Like you cannot ignore these things forever. So while these tasks have to be completed, fortunately for us, we don't have to do them all the time by hand. We don't have to do them using human beings, right? They can and should be automated. So if we look at, say we break down 4 drivers of automation in modern IT systems. We look at things like complexity, speed, mistakes, and toil. So our manual processes in general are prone to mistakes. I did this last week. We had like a workshop that one of our engineers was giving on like Kubernetes, and like there were 2 Helm commands that looked similar, and I skipped the first one by accident, and then nothing worked. So I had to go back and review it because it was in the wiki or whatever. So you know that you might skip a command, or there might be like a very, very long command with lots of options that like scrolls off the screen, and you might miss something, right? It's very easy to do that with, some of the complex things that we're doing, right? Modern ecosystems might be composed of hundreds or even thousands of individual components, right? You know this. Cloud infrastructure, you've got your containers and your hosts and your networks, and you've got services for monitoring and collecting metrics. You've got alerting systems like PagerDuty. You've got log collection, authentication, authorization, A/B testing, beta testing, feature flags, storage, runtimes, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff, all these possible combinations is basically infinite. So when we have all these different components, any of them can change at any time. So you've got third-party services and resources are changed by their vendors on their own schedule. Your internal teams are running on their own schedule. So you have all this stuff that's always moving around, and like trying to pin it down to one particular state. It's like you can't step into the same river twice, right? Things are continuously moving. So it's hard to keep track of all of that stuff. So we know it's easy to make mistakes with these manual processes. So one thing automation will do for our manual process is it's a permanent record of the current expertise, right? You're taking all of the esoteric information that folks have learned and putting it into a best practice in a shared place for use later, right? It's like the Pensieve in Harry Potter. You take that little stream of thought and then you drop it into your automation as a place to store it forever. And then finally, we automate to avoid all that toil, right? All that repetitive work. We don't want to be patching hundreds of systems by hand. We don't want to be rebuilding thousands of containers by hand. All of those things we want to have some kind of automation around so that our human beings are doing higher valuable work. And then there's a couple of myths, right? And like I say, I worked at Chef a long time. So this is one I heard a lot as we were talking to folks who were sort of new to Chef and new to infrastructure automation. It's like, well, I don't want to automate myself out of a job. And like, yes, you do want to automate yourself out of a job. You want to automate yourself into a new job. When your team has automated the toil out of everyday tasks, you're left with the work that requires human brains. It requires creativity. It requires long-term planning and strategic thinking, and provides more value to the organization. You're planning your improvements. You're building more robust disaster recovery plan. You're building and shipping more new features that your users can fall in love with. So smoothing out all of those tasks required to get to the basic things done leaves you more time for doing all the fun stuff. So at some point, right, you get to a point where your day-to-day job looks significantly different from what it once was. So you have automated yourself out of that job, but you've automated yourself into a new one. The cartoon itself it's a little tongue in cheek. There's always an XKCD for pretty much every case, right? You definitely don't want to be spending all of your time maintaining, refactoring, and fiddling around with your automation. But it is, it's going to be part of your job, right? In the future when your job looks a little bit different. And then there's another one, a bit of a myth that really arose in like the 1970s with like systems automation research for like aerospace and power generation and nuclear power, right? The idea that you don't have to know anything if it's all automated, right? And there is research showing that it is possible for your junior engineers or your new people on the team to not get as much training if all the tasks are automated. So you want to be thinking about when you have new folks join your team and they see all this amazing tool set that you have and all these beautiful pieces of automation, how to onboard them to all the knowledge that they'll need. And part of that, you want to do maybe give them the task of maintaining the automation so that they need to be able to go into those projects and look at how they're used, and a new version of the software comes down the pipeline and says, oh, well, we've changed the start options for this. So someone needs to go in and change the automation, or we've moved the log files. And now they look like this, and updating all of those things. So you want to have a very concerted effort around making sure that people who are new to the team and your junior members are still learning stuff, right? And not everything is hidden in the automation. So let's take a look at a few things that look like good automation, right? And there's a whole lot of people who have a whole lot of thoughts and feelings about this. I've picked like one version of this out of a book called Architecting for Scale by Lee Atchison. And this is the second edition of this book. And he has a whole lot of really good stuff in here. But, hopefully this all feels familiar to you as you are working through all of your chef stuff, right? So some of the things that you want your automation to look like, some of the characteristics it should have, right? You want it to be testable. Hopefully you're running Test Kitchen, right? On all of your things, or you're running Cookstyle and all the other tools that come with it to help you keep things in a good format, right? You want it to be flexible for future improvement. You want to use those variables, maybe you don't have 12 different layers of them that you're using, but places where things can be more general, right? So that when I need more Tomcat servers in a couple of weeks, but they're like over there, then I can still use the same stuff. We want to be putting our automation under version control and doing PRs. There's lots of folks who have sort of described this process, especially for infrastructure code, looking at your recipes, looking at the things that you're doing in your chef repositories, and making sure that you're using the best practices. You have your own, maybe you have an internal style guide, you have your internal set of libraries and things that you're using, and making sure you're keeping those good practices in line. And then you want it to be applicable to related resources and not a one-off. We've all been through this. You've got that one machine that like sits in the corner and nobody's exactly sure what's on it, but it's important. And then you have to, maybe you're trying to script your chef recipes around it, or try and rebuild it, or whatever it is. We want to make sure that for automation in particular, that we have the ability to apply things to related resources, right? This is similar to the flexibility run. You want things that you're going to invest in this automation as part of your project, and you want to make sure it's reusable. And then you also want it to be repeatable and auditable. And we'll talk a little bit more about auditability in a little while, but you have that in your chef infrastructure. So hopefully you have that ability to apply that to the other pieces of automation that you might be working with, whether it's your build servers or other components in your service. So just thinking of this as a little checklist as we're looking at new tools, or we're looking at new kinds of workflows, or other things that we're going to plug into our environment, that we want these characteristics to be present. And another thing we want to make sure we don't miss is idempotency. And hopefully you've heard this, right? We used to sneak it into the chef training. So hopefully you've heard idempotency, right? I call it the I word because it's our SAT 50-cent word here, right? If you haven't heard it, no worries. Let's review it a little bit. It has a fancy mathematical definition. Idempotency is the property of certain operations whereby, anytime it's whereby, it's fancy, They can be applied multiple times without changing the result beyond the initial application. In mathematics, you can think about multiplying by 1. It's always going to be the same, right? So it sounds confusing and a little bit ominous, but it's super helpful for thinking about what happens when you run automation more than once and how to handle any messages that might generate. If you've been using Chef for a while, just kind of take this for advantage, right? Because Chef does this. You run in the Chef client multiple times, it's going to check to make sure if it's even needing to do the work before it does anything, right? When you're looking at other automation tools and other things that you're going to plug into your infrastructure, keep that same thing in mind. What happens when the automation runs and the system's already in the state that you want it to be in? Do you make a change? Do you report an error? Because there's lots of tools that will assume that there's a human being watching the whole process and will think it's okay to report an error if, say, a user account already exists on the machine. But when you're automating it and you're putting it into a tool or a script, there's no human watching all those steps, right? So you don't want to make that same assumption. So we wanted to keep in mind what kinds of response we get when the system's already in the state that we want it to be in. And then looking at, what's good to automate? What kinds of things should we be looking at for automation, right? We got our Chef client comes in and automates a bunch of installations and things like that that used to take forever, right? And now they're super quick. But you want to automate the tasks you do most often, or the ones that take the most time, right? Or the ones that are, super complex, right? That will save you the most effort over the long term and reduce the kind of toil that you're doing, right? So you have yet another XKCD, right? Because they're always applicable. And this one is a table, right? It represents how much time over the course of 5 years, right? So a long period of time you will save if you automate a given task, right? Based on how often you do it and how much time you shave off the process, right? So when you're making small improvements in tasks that you do very often, you get a lot of significant rewards over the period of 5 years. If you make a huge change off of things that you do on a less regular basis, you're still getting big rewards. But the place where you're not saving yourself a lot of time is where you have things you don't run super often and you don't shave a lot of time off of them, right? Where automation can help you though in those is that next piece of it, that encapsulating expertise, so that if I only have to run something at, say, the end of the fiscal year, if I have it documented in some piece of automation, then I know I'm not going to forget how to do it until next year, right? So I always have that potential to have my automation wrapped up that way as well. So there's a bunch of different ways to look at that piece. The way we look at things, I work at PagerDuty. We talk a lot about incident response. So looking at for, some of the workflows that we work with our customers about, we look at maybe some example tasks, some things that are pretty common when you are responding to an incident. So maybe you have lots of tasks that you run day to day with your team, and you could put together this sort of graph, right? Where on the y-axis, you have how much impact does this task have, from no impact, things that are really just like diagnostics or there's no change to the actual running of the thing, to things that are high impact, like they might be significant changes. And then along the x-axis, we have things that are simple, right? Maybe they're a single step, maybe they're multiple steps, but no options or things like that, through to things that are more sophisticated. And where you can start to pick off tasks to automate is you can start in that lower left-hand corner with simple things. Go fetch these logs, go restart that service. Maybe then over time, you get more comfortable with the automation that you have. You can start running things that are more sophisticated. I want to be able to automatically add or remove capacity to this pod, and those things will come along. If you're starting out from a place of saying no automation, a lot of folks will be hesitant to start getting into that sort of first step and looking at what's next, what can we trust the machine to do. And this is a good way to start sort of gaining that practice, is to start with these things that are pretty simple. And then it's a whole life cycle, right? We start with things that are, places where we have automation opportunities. There's no automation, right? And the tasks that exist, and we haven't automated things, and we're still pretty reliant on humans doing all the button pushing, right? And then maybe we move to human initiated automation. We've got some scripts, we have some tools, and our team members run them on demand, right? When they want something done or need to complete a task in an unscheduled manner. And then we look at automation with oversight, where the automation kind of kicks itself off in response to an event, but humans are required to sort of watch it and make sure it doesn't go haywire. And then we move more into automation that runs on its own. We've got automation with fallback, where the automation kicks off on its own and pages a human being or alerts a human being when there's a problem. And then finally, we get to the point where the automation just kind of runs on its own. And instead of creating, say, alerts, it creates data, right? And you can think of that one as, if you have a service that's kind of problematic and is sort of constantly alerting people that it wants to be restarted, if you automate that restart, you're going from, service Y required humans to restart it 10 times yesterday to we now have a graph that says service Y got restarted 10 times yesterday, and humans didn't have to be involved. So you're moving towards a place where your human beings are no longer interrupted by things that your automation can handle. So there's a whole lot of tools that will help you move through all of these steps. And some stuff doesn't ever get to that last step. You might have things that are just too quirky or a little too brittle, and you don't quite trust that the environment's going to be in exactly a nice place to receive the automation. So you want humans to know what's going on, and that's totally fine. But what you don't want is a place where you're not automating anything and the human beings are doing all of the manual tasks all the time, right? That's not fun either. So I want to give you an example with a product called Rundeck. And I know there's folks out there in Chefland who have used Rundeck because I've talked to in the past. So I want to give you a bit of a sample of what Rundeck would do and what you might use it for in a chef environment, right? So Rundeck is what we call runbook automation. It's a place to abstract all of your tasks and sort of store them in a place on the Rundeck server that then you can delegate them to everybody else, right? So your Rundeck server has authentication, it has authorization in it, and you can plug in your single sign-on and all those things, and then you can say to your SREs or your DBAs or your developers to say, hey, go run this thing yourself, instead of asking your DevOps or your SRE teams or whomever else who knows how to do it for them, right? So your subject matter experts encapsulate all of their knowledge, they put it into the Rundeck server, and then they set up some permissions for everyone else to be able to do things. And you can set pretty strict permissions on it by node, by job, by tags, and all those great things that you're used to seeing in the chef environment. Is very similar to what things look like in Rundeck. There's still nodes and all that good stuff. So the way we have the little demo I'm going to show you is I have my Rundeck server, and it's configured to access some chef nodes and run chef client on those nodes. Because I know there's folks out there, we pour one out for push jobs, that have instances where you want to be able to run chef client on demand, or you have teams that want to be able to run chef client on demand, but you don't want to give them access to those environments, whether they're production or test or whatever they are. So we can add a layer of abstraction and authorization via Rundeck to allow them to do that. And that's what we're going to look at here. So I have my users, they want to be able to run chef client right now, and they're going to go in and log into Rundeck, and then the Rundeck server has access to the chef client nodes, and then they have their conversation with the chef server as they do the thing. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to exit out of this, and we're going to look at Rundeck. So let's go back to the beginning of this project. So Rundeck is a standalone server. You run it in your stuff, right? And it provides you with the ability to, like I said, encapsulate all this knowledge, and then you configure nodes like you do in Chef, and you give them access. And Rundeck is going to, for Linux, there's an SSH into those nodes and do the things that it needs to do. And Windows, I think you use WinRM. So I have nodes. Right now I only have a couple because this is actually all running on my local system. One's the server itself, and one's my practice node, node 1. So that's what we're going to be looking at. It's a Unix family system, and it has a user on it called agent. An agent is the account that Rundeck will use to log into that host. And that agent user also has access on the host via sudo to run Chef client, right? So you have those basic permissions that you're probably used to as you've been running Chef. So there's a couple of different things that go on here. We can run ad hoc commands against our servers. So if I have, say, node 1, and I have that matched, and then I can run, maybe I want to run Chef client right now as my admin user. I'm just going to throw it in there and let it go. And you can see that it's going to do that. There's no run list here because it's a container. We're just practicing, right? But it allows me to do that. And then I can then also, rather than give people the access to just willy-nilly run whatever command, I can give them access to specific jobs. And there's a bunch of jobs included here as samples. But the one I have down here is run Chef client on demand. And so let's take a look at this job. And the workflow is super simple. It has one step in it, and there's the command that it runs. So then I can give other users on the Rundeck server access to this job. They don't have to know the Chef client command. They don't have to know anything else. I can actually limit the number of nodes that they're allowed to run it on, right? So if they're only allowed to run it on a certain dev pod, that's great. I can put that in there as part of the job definition so that when this user logs in, they have access to run the Chef client job on these particular nodes, and then they don't have to ping me and ask for Chef client to be run or sit around and wait for whatever the schedule is, right? So from that perspective, it can be super helpful as a replacement for things like push jobs that aren't around anymore. So let's look at what this looks like for a non-privileged user. So here I'm logged in as the admin user, which has all the privileges. So we're going to log in another window here as Alice. And Alice only has access to limited things here. So we can see Alice's view. If we line those two sides up, Alice's view is significantly different, right? She doesn't have access to all this extra gobbledygook here, right? There's only a handful of things she's allowed to do. So Alice is going to come into jobs, and you can see she only has access. I've only given her permission to run the Chef client job, right? And we looked in the job definition, it's only going to run on certain nodes. So I've already limited what Alice can do and what she can have impact on in my Chef environment. So Alice can come in here. If she needs to change the target nodes, if there are more nodes, she can do that. And then she can go ahead and run that job. And it gives her a report on how that's going. And if all things come back okay, then we're all good. If I go to the dashboard, she doesn't have access to know anything else that's going on the Rundeck server. So her access and her viewpoint is limited to just running that job, and that's all she's allowed to do. My admin user, if we flip back over here, gets a report, right? There's auditability here. I can look in and say, hey, Alice logged in and ran this thing. So if there was an issue, a way to track that down, we could find that, right? And there's all kinds of plugins for Rundeck. So if you have other pieces in your infrastructure that you want to, say, kick things off via an alert or something like that, you can plug it into your monitoring systems and other great things like that. It's not just limited to running ad hoc commands. There's also a couple of plugins for Chef specifically to help you sort of manage nodes and a couple of other things that you might find useful for employing Rundeck in your Chef environment. So if you'd like to give us a shout, we'd love to tell you more about all that stuff. So let's go back to our slides here. And that's what we did. We have Rundeck is our standalone service. You build projects based on your organizational needs. You can organize them by team or business unit or whatever else. You attach your nodes, just like Chef nodes, same kind of representation, same vocabulary. Then you create your jobs. Those are your automation that encapsulates all of your team's expertise. Then you add your users and allow them to do things like run the jobs. And then you enjoy some quiet time to think about the next strategic plan for your projects. So if you would like to know more, we would love to tell you more. We'd love to share more about this with you, and how it can help you in your chef environment and with your infrastructure and all of the other crazy things that you're working with. Rundeck is at rundeck.com and PagerDuty is at pagerduty.com. And if you'd like to know more about automation, we have a white paper at autoremediation.pagerduty.com, and we would love to talk more with you about that. So I hope you have enjoyed this and maybe learned a vocabulary word or two. As always, you can reach out to me. I'm LNXCHK on Twitter and things. I'm also on the Chef Community Slack. If you'd like to ping me there, I do have that Slack team open. And I hope you enjoy the rest of ChefConf. So thank you.
Awesome.
I'm gonna stop my share so I can see things here.
Thank you so much, Mandy, for that. I think that was a great talk. It was very informative. We're going to open it up for Q&A. And so if anyone has questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask. There's no preference.
Who's there? Benny?
Really?
Brittany?
I mean, the only thing I really had to add was I started cackling when you said pour one out for push jobs.
I was gonna find like a little beer Giphy or something to put in my. I was like, that might be too much trolling for that. So yeah.
Pour one out for push jobs.
Yes, pour one out for push jobs.
Cool.
Well, I've got a question. So Mandy, you talked about Rundeck. Does Rundeck also serve as like an observability or monitoring tool?
No, it's really just automation. So it's really just about, whatever jobs you've got, you can put that through there. And some people try to make it like a build server, but it's not really a functioning for that either. It's more like these ad hoc jobs that everybody has a pile of sitting around. So.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Makes sense. So then what would you suggest? Because I mean, when you're doing automation, you kind of like have to have some kind of like observability or monitoring tool, at least from my experience. What would you suggest?
That's a whole other ball game, right? So there's a huge suite of all those things. And Brittany, I know as she's hiding there, probably has opinions as well.
Gotcha.
I will say that we have chef friends over at Datadog, and we have chef friends at Honeycomb as places to look at those kinds of tools for metrics collection and monitoring and like that kind of telemetry gathering, depending on what you're trying to do as far as like, are you doing synthetic monitoring? Are you doing post hoc monitoring? Are you doing tracing? All those things there. Plus there's like crazy commercial tools, like Splunk will do some of that stuff for you. And yeah, that's a whole other ball game. But you could take input from some of those tools into something like Rundeck and say, hey, this thing is no longer getting as many hits as it used to. So like go kick it and restart it or whatever and plug it in that way.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. I know it's going to be hard to convince some people that that automation does not automate you out of a job. I mean, but you did a really good job. You did a really great job, like convincing. That is definitely like it's a long road.
It is like we're not doing the same jobs we used to do, right? Like there's a whole lot of things we don't have to do anymore. Like I don't have to put on my parka and take my crash cart down all the hot aisle and cold aisle in my data center to boot up all my servers.
But my bash script.
But your bash scripts, yes,
Right.
all the knowledge you gleaned on building all those boot scripts and all that. It's okay. It's time to move on.
Woo, woo, woo. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mandy. Like I said, it was very informative. And thank you everyone for tuning into Mandy's talk. Stay tuned for the rest of ChefConf. Make sure I'm happy that you are registered. Everyone here is actually registered. Happy to have you here and happy to have Mandy on with us today. Thank you all so much.